Good evening, and welcome to the February 12th, 2020 meeting of the City of Lake Forest Plan Commission. I'm Rosemary Kerr, Chairman of the Commission. At this time, I would like to ask members of the Commission to introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Good evening, Jamie Moorhead.
Monica Artman-Ruggles.
Susan Athenson.
John Dixon.
Our first item of business will be the public hearing and action. The consideration of minutes from the January 8th, 2020 Plan Commission will take place at the next meeting, as the minutes are still being prepared. So tonight, for public hearing and action, the Commission will continue consideration of a draft update to the chapter in the city's comprehensive plan relating to the Route 60 entrance corridor and surrounding area. Background information on this agenda item was presented at the December 2019 and January 2020 meetings. The draft document and background information are available on the city's website and also available in hard copy from the Community Development Department. Kathy Cerniak of City Staff will make the presentation, and before she begins, I'm going to ask Commission members if they have any ex parte conflicts or contacts or conflicts of interest to report.
None.
None.
I do have one, in that Rami Lopat, who had spoken our last meeting and provided some information, followed up and wanted to know where to direct additional comments and some clarifications that she thought would be useful to us, and I directed her to send all that to Kathy Cerniak. Also, we will have opportunity for public comment and testimony. And I do have a number of folks who have already asked to speak tonight. And before opening the public testimony period, I will make some additional comments. Thank you. Ms. Cerniak?
Thank you, Chairman Kerr, members of the Commission. As you noted, Chairman, you have heard presentations on this draft update to the chapter of the comprehensive plan that deals with the Route 60 entrance corridor, both in December and again last month in January. I will not repeat that information. You heard from Scott Goldstein and Lee Brown of Tesca and Associates. They assisted staff in preparing this draft. They were very instrumental in conducting individual interviews, holding focus groups, and working with the working group that was put together for this chapter. I do want to note what you have in your packet is a memo from me that summarizes in response to some of the points that were raised at the last meeting. You have a copy of the current chapter of the comprehensive plan that relates to Route 60. You previously received that, but thought it might be good for you to have that. I believe Commissioner Douglas requested a map reflecting the current zoning in the area. That is included in your packet, along with a map that provides a high-level overview of existing land use. And then, Chairman Kerr, I believe you requested that we provide some information on floodplain and wetlands. Just to be clear, this map is simply the overlays that we can pull from the county data files. Those are just indicators. These do not reflect mapped wetlands, designated wetlands, and this map will not be part of the chapter. This is an indicator for city staff. If projects come in, if development proposals come in, we know to at least ask for verification as to whether or not wetlands exist. So just to clarify, that's just the information that's available to us from the county data layers. Next in your packet, you have two versions of the chapter. And I say two versions because one is a clean copy and one actually is a black line that reflects what we have changed, the language changes since the last meeting. We know that the black line is difficult to read, so we also provided the clean copy. You then have the land use map, which would be part of the comprehensive plan, and you have the description of land uses. So just to be clear on what you have, I know some of it appears as a duplication, but that's simply because we wanted you to know what we changed. So a very quick step back to remind you that this is the second chapter. The City Council has directed us to do an update of the entire comprehensive plan. Initially, when they directed us to undertake this update, our schedule showed that we were first going to update the housing chapter. Because of some discussion, which this commission was involved in, about Waukegan Road and the Settler Square Business District, the council then directed us to shift our focus to first address that area, and then because of some an active petition before you in this area, the council then directed us to shift to this area. So it was not, it was a conscious decision by the city council. It was not a change that staff made. The next step in the update process, we will be looking at the Central Business District and the housing chapter, and we hope to run those fairly concurrently. What we have seen, both as we talked about Waukegan Road and as we talked about Route 60, is that a significant part of the discussion focused on housing. Waukegan Road, that was one of the main themes, is that we needed to increase density, needed to increase mixed use. So we know there aren't clear lines between these chapters. And as we go through each chapter, get the updates in place, then we will circle back, work with the consultant to really integrate the chapters, pull some themes through that may have to do with transportation or sustainability. Certainly the plan will address how the plan is to be used. The foreword of the plan will speak to the comprehensive plan that was adopted in 1998 and kind of talk about where we've been. So there's a lot more work to do. So what you're seeing here is a draft of this chapter and not intended to answer all the questions that may have come up to date. So with that background, just a reminder, the comprehensive plan is not zoning. It does not mandate any specific development. It does not prevent someone coming in with a proposed development that is not in alignment with the comprehensive plan. We certainly have seen that if something is in alignment with the comprehensive plan, it makes it much easier for the Plan Commission and City Council to move a project forward, but someone might come in with a great idea that wasn't contemplated. The comprehensive plan does not in any way prevent that from being submitted for review or from the Plan Commission holding a public hearing on it. The comprehensive plan does not change existing zoning. It might lead to a discussion with the Waukegan Road chapter that was updated. We are looking at the B1 zoning district, so that zoning district is likely to come forward to you with some recommended changes, but the comprehensive plan itself does not change the language in the code pertaining to any business district or any zoning district, and it does not change the zoning on any particular property. The recommended land use, the preferred land use could be different from the zoning that's currently on the property. And finally, the comprehensive plan doesn't take away any private property rights. It doesn't mandate that anyone do anything specific with their property. The comprehensive plan is intended to articulate a vision for the future, normally a high-level vision, again, not necessarily speaking exactly to where buildings need to go or a specific type of land use or how access is going to be addressed or how a crosswalk is going to be improved, but really states that high-level vision. It's intended to set realistic expectations for residents in the area. I think we've heard that some uncertainty in this area perhaps has affected the potential to sell some properties in that area. It also sets realistic expectations for property owners and developers. If a developer reads the comprehensive plan and, again, brings in something that generally aligns with it, I think there's a realistic expectation that the Plan Commission is going to stand behind its plan and the City Council will do the same. The along the same line, the comprehensive plan really establishes parameters. When we bring something to you, we do discuss in our staff report whether or not something is in compliance with the comprehensive plan designation for that area. And finally, more broadly, the comprehensive plan should guide policy decisions by the City Council, should guide decisions on infrastructure, capital investment, budget decisions. So it should really provide a guide that is broader than just providing a framework for discussing specific development proposals. So again, just to summarize without going into everything, the vision that came out of the public information sessions, the individual interviews, the focus groups, and the working group, number one, recognize that it's very important to the city as a whole that Conway Park remain vital. It is an important economic engine for the city, and suburban office parks have changed. We know that if you look at suburban office parks that were developed 20 years ago or 30 years ago, many of those are isolated, and there's nothing but office buildings in those parks. Certainly some separation is good, but what we have heard consistently from the employers at Conway Park is that they want amenities for their employees. In fact, just this morning I attended a Conway Park Owners Association meeting and heard that all reiterated again, that for their employees, they want amenities, they want restaurants, they want hotels, they want off-site meeting rooms, they want small-scale retail, they want housing options. There is a real concern about transportation and how do we get people out to Conway Park. Certainly there are shuttles currently from the train stations. We've been fortunate to have Metra add some trains on the West Line, both early in the morning and late afternoon. Those amenities, I can't emphasize enough how clearly and how frequently we hear from the major employers out there that they need those amenities. We heard quite a bit that when you come across the tollway, people don't necessarily feel like they're in Lake Forest, that they're looking for something that creates a little bit more of a sense of place or an identity or relates to Lake Forest. Consistently, we heard that Route 60 shouldn't be developed to look like every other highway that comes off of an interchange, that it really should look different, and it should give you the feel that you're in a community that really takes quality development and quality of life seriously. The other piece that we heard repeatedly was that people want more pedestrian and bicycle connections out in that area. Certainly the recent bicycle bridge over the railroad tracks addressed a huge issue. It got people across the railroad tracks. We know that people want to get out west. We hear that surprisingly frequently. When the tollway bridge was reconstructed, there was a pathway provided for on the north side of the bridge on the westbound lane, and it is a protected pathway. And the goal that we've talked about for many years is to make a connection from Academy Drive out to the tollway. I still think it's a bit complicated to cross some of those ramps on a bicycle or walking, but I'm assured that there's ways to do that. We also have heard about other connections. We heard that people do cross Route 60, which again is surprising. We hear, certainly, we see firsthand in good weather that people, the number of people walking at noon or in the morning or even in the evening in Conway Park is pretty significant. On weekends, we have bicycle groups that use Conway Park. We have rollerbladers that go through Conway Park. So it's seen as a recreational area on off hours. We also have the trails that are in the Forest Preserve located at the north end. So the vision is mom and apple pie, but that's what visions are. And I think in this case, really doing what needs to be done out there to make sure the office park is successful in the future. It was also noted that there aren't many developable properties out there. And the goal of this plan was to really open up the opportunity for the types of land uses that are preferred or identified as appropriate for those properties. A summary of strategies. How do we get there? How do we get to that vision? As I said, a whole bunch of different uses: restaurant, hotels, small-scale retail. Amazingly, we keep hearing gas station too, which is, again, a bit surprising with, I don't know how many pumps there are now at Costco, but there's quite a few. Transportation options. Again, this morning at our Conway Park Owners Association meeting, we talk frequently about the shuttle. We talk about other options. We know that Uber and Lyft now offer some corporate programs. So we are going to be working with Lake County partners and the businesses out there to continue to have those discussions. It's not the transportation issue, we don't solve once and then forget about it. It's ever evolving because there are new ways of getting people from here to there. Flexible parking standards. There is an acknowledgement that over time there may be less need for parking lots. The offices out in the Conway Park area have parking that exceeds the city's requirement. They've always been very insistent that they need a greater number of parking spaces than the code requires. And I think now we're starting to see some of them not jump right into it, but at least understand that there may be an opportunity in the future. And as we talked to them, this plan does recognize that there may be an opportunity for outlots. They still want to make sure that those uses are compatible, that they're uses that, whether it's a kind of a casual restaurant or something that people could go to in the morning, maybe a coffee shop, something that would meet their employees' needs. There is concern about mixing residential directly into Conway Park. There was not support among the employers for doing that, recognizing that at peak travel times, both in the morning and in the evening, it can be difficult to get in and out of that park. But they're certainly interested in housing options, including rental, in that general area, with the idea that some of their employees who don't want to commute from the city or from the north or from the west could live closer, and that perhaps bringing those renters, those employees into the community will then set them up to really want to stay, and perhaps their future home buyers. There's also, this is a consistent theme throughout the chapters that we've talked about so far, is really to update the code to establish some clearer development parameters. We certainly have setbacks currently in the code. We don't, and we do have standards for parking lots, for instance, but there could be more specificity, which again could help to streamline approvals, because you all would have seen those parameters, endorse them or not endorse them ahead of time when a particular development comes forward. More strategies that were talked about, different ways of enhancing the entrance. Really, some talk about somehow evoking some themes of Lake Forest or some aspect, whether it's quality architecture, quality landscaping, not necessarily putting another clock tower at the corner, but something that really ties that area into Lake Forest. Aligning setbacks with specific uses. When the comprehensive plan for this area was updated in 2001, 150-foot setback was established, which has been adhered to. In fact, on the north side of Route 60, some of those office buildings are set back 180 feet, 200 feet, so there really was that sense of allowing Route 6 to be a broad landscape dominant corridor. However, there is recognition in this plan that if in fact we're going to achieve the types of amenities in a very limited area that are needed by the employers in the office park, that we really need to provide for some flexibility in the setback, again, in a very limited location, not throwing the concept of the setback out, but recognizing that on particular sites, with particular uses, with a high-quality plan, that a reduction in the setback might be appropriate. Exactly what that reduction would be, that would be determined later. The 150-foot setback stays in place right now, but this just encourages flexibility with that, knowing that if we're going to put commercial development out there, we need to do the best we can to make sure that it is successful. There was recognition that transitions need to be established between differing uses, whether that's berms, landscaping, stands of woodlands, but recognizing that is a mix of use out there does create a bit more of an urban feeling, and I think there's some hesitancy around creating an urban feeling, and so really protecting those existing or future residential areas from uses that might have early morning deliveries or later night parking or lights or signage. Again, enhancing walkability, talked about many ways to do that, whether it's simply making a wider median, whether it's making crosswalks more visible, or whether it's something more extreme. Is there an opportunity, could there be funding in the future to build an overpass at some location or an underpass? Certainly that's not going to happen at every intersection, but is there a way that we could make it more comfortable to cross Route 60? And is there a way that we can take advantage of the wide setbacks and provide some connecting links that perhaps could meander a bit? Perhaps there's a drinking fountain or some public art along the way, paths that would cater to not only people who are walking or biking recreationally, but those who might want to commute by bicycle. And we do have a bicycle racing community or a group who is interested in that. And then addressing access issues. We have heard for a long time the concern about cut-through traffic from the office park, particularly as we enhance that with different amenities. So you do see in the plan the recommendation that Amberley Court be terminated at the west end in some fashion to really separate that from the existing office development to the west and from future commercial development on that parcel. We know that there are some properties that don't currently have adequate access. The city can't mandate that surrounding properties talk to each other, but we can certainly continue, as we've done in the past, and encourage those discussions and try and facilitate those if there's willing partners. Secondary emergency access has also been the subject of ongoing discussions with the academy and with some partners in the office park, and my sense is that we're getting close to coming up with an emergency access solution there. There are some opportunity areas identified in the plan, and preferred uses are identified for those opportunity areas, as well as challenges that each of those areas face. And then just quickly to review the map, Route 60, Field Drive, this is the office area in pink. Really no change is proposed to that area, except that this plan suggests we be more flexible to allow some amenities, like restaurants, coffee shops. Hotel obviously is under construction. Hotels are already permitted in that area. Daycare, uses that might directly engage employees while they're on the site each day. The blue area identifies Lake Forest Academy campus. Lake Forest Academy has reinforced frequently that they do not have any plans to reduce the size of their campus. They are strongly committed to continuing to increase faculty housing on the campus. In fact, they have a project underway right now where they're adding 4 faculty apartments to one of their existing dormitories. They have a number of duplex affordable units on site. They have their faculty housing up in this area too. A number of years ago, Academy Woods parcel was spun off from the Academy, and there are 72 homes in that area. Academy Drive is private, and that does present some challenges for Opportunity Area 2. Again, it's an area that the city is well aware of. This plan recommends that we really expand the potential uses for that property. The 2001 plan really focused on community uses and, a bit idealistic uses. I think a museum is in there, a performing arts center. Those uses are still identified for that parcel, but also expanding it to recognize that it could be residential, it could be a smaller scale office. It is a transition parcel as you move from the office park and from the Willow Lake development to the lower density. There is an opportunity there. There's currently a non-conforming grandfathered in use on that property. A portion of the property, the front portion, the southern portion of that property is owned by Lake Forest Open Lands. But again, we have had discussions. I think there's some interest, some willingness to have discussions to really find a solution for that property. And that means talking about how do we get utilities to the property, how do we provide access, how do we recognize that some portions of the property are really pretty extraordinary natural areas. What is the best use for that property, recognizing it certainly has development potential. The existing development, both the orange and the yellow, are residential neighborhoods developed in the 90s and early 2000s. Single-family homes, as you get further away, further south, you have townhomes or duplexes in this area. One of 2 approved condominiums is built on a portion of this Amberley Woods property. Again, this is Route 60 and Saunders Road. Amberley Woods is a 40-acre parcel. It was approved altogether as a development with single-family homes in this area. 2 condominium buildings were approved in this area. And as it stands today, 2 office buildings are approved and with some adaptive reuse on the remaining part of the property. This number 3 area, 8.5 acres, did come before you recently with a development proposal. That property owner has been patient and has certainly been very engaged in this process, and we appreciate that patience. The plan as currently before you really identifies that as a prime site to meet those needs for amenities that I talked about earlier. The office park employers have been very clear that this is an ideal location for the opportunity to meet those needs that they've identified. The 24 single-family homes that were originally approved as part of Amberley Woods, 5 have been constructed. Certainly terminating Amberley Court and developing some certainty around what's going to happen on this parcel could prompt some development, but it may also be worthwhile to talk about. Are the homes that are currently approved there the right fit for the market? Is the configuration appropriate? If we're going to cul-de-sac that, is it at least worth a discussion about should there be something that happens there a little bit differently? And then this area, the Saunders Road area, this is, I believe, about 12 5-acre parcels. A number of years ago, the city extended water and sanitary sewer to that area. Previously, it was in the county. There are a couple new homes under construction or pending in that area right now, but there also is an opportunity to look at that area. Could it be higher density? Could we reestablish some access in this area that could get people in that area out to Route 60? Could that be an opportunity for townhomes or some cluster development, recognizing that some portion of these properties are wetlands, some portions are wetlands, and since these properties are immediately adjacent to the tollway, it might be appropriate to construct a berm or a sound wall in order to make that area really attractive to developers. So that's a high-level summary. I'm happy to answer any questions or address anything specifically. If you choose to do so this evening, you could recommend approval of this. Certainly, there's still some wordsmithing to be done, and would welcome any comments, and certainly welcome comments from the public. But I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. It may be best for you to stay up there while answering the questions. And we'll start with Commissioner Dixon.
I don't have any questions.
Commissioner Athenson.
I have some questions for you, Kathy. So just referencing off the comment about Rami Lopat, when she had sent in a lot of edits and suggested changes. Did you get a chance to meet with her, and did the consultants meet with her on her suggestions?
We incorporated many of her suggestions. That's why you have the black line.
Okay.
So we did hear from her, and certainly many of the suggestions were appropriate. Some of them, such as including in this chapter kind of a detailed review of the existing conditions. For a comprehensive plan, that really isn't appropriate. This plan is intended to be a 10-year, 20-year plan. So in 10 years, if someone picks up this plan, so we did work hard to incorporate those comments.
Okay, I just wanted to check because her first email that went out in October, I guess, wasn't responded to, so I just wanted to make sure that she got together with the consultants and.
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. So if I understand what you're saying, so the analysis of the 1998 plan, what was achieved from that, you're going to include that in the final document, not in each section?
Yes. As a whole, we will do an overview.
Okay.
But in this area specifically, and this area was actually updated in 2001, it is included, this area really, there's been a lot of change in this area since 2001. And much of what was envisioned at that time, the build-out of Conway Farms, the build-out of Conway Park, much of that was achieved. There was resolution on what was a 70-acre parcel, which today is Stonebridge and Town Line Park. This, in the 1998 plan, was identified for another 700,000 square feet of office. And at 4 cars per thousand, you can do the math. But then then Mayor Howard Kerr really asked us to step back and study that. So yes, we will review at a high level how things have changed since the previous plan and the later amendments to that plan.
Okay. And then I know I had mentioned this the last time we talked about the west side evaluation. So right now, this comprehensive plan is not really used in the deliberations of the HPC and BRB and City Council. So in the future, it will be. Is that
And
what
it
I'm hearing?
has been.
It has been.
In fact, the discussion that most readily comes to mind when Forest Square was being discussed quite a few years ago. There was absolutely the discussion because the comprehensive plan that was in effect for that area talked about bringing buildings forward. There was an extensive conversation before the Plan Commission, before the Building Review Board, and that plan consciously wasn't followed. The buildings were stepped back, and the plan that is now in place for that area does talk about trying to bring some outlots, as that area redevelops, some outlots closer to the street back. So could we use it more frequently and more diligently? Absolutely. But it certainly is something that gets referenced anytime we look at a subdivision proposal or, but we will be clearer in this plan in the foreword about how it's intended to be used.
Yes, and I would appreciate, I was involved with that development when I was on the BRB, and I don't remember talking about the comprehensive plan so much. So I think we need to really raise awareness on those boards that we do have a comprehensive plan, and it should guide your development and your decisions. I don't think, in the 12 years I was on BRB and HPC, I don't really remember it being referenced. So maybe make the commissioners and the board members and the council members more aware that this document exists, and it should guide your development. It's not a regulation, it's not a rule, but it should guide your deliberations in some way. And then also about, I know we talked about this before, about the evaluation process and how are we meeting the plan. And before, you just had mentioned that we just do it when we do the next plan. But when we talked about the West Lake Forest, we talked about maybe doing it every 5 years. So is that still something that might be a possibility to kind of look back at the comprehensive plan maybe at the council level and say, hey, how are we doing with this comprehensive plan?
Certainly. And the plan can also be amended for a particular area in 2 years or in 7 years or in 12 years. But yes, we will address that, and that early chapter or that forward will come back to you as well.
Okay,
for
because,
review.
we're doing so much work on this. I just want to make sure that this is a working document and that we're not doing this for nothing. Everyone's spending so much time on it. We really have to make sure that everyone understands it's a guiding document for development as we go forward, and this is our general vision. And so that's why I'm asking those questions. So, anyways, I had a question on the vision, because when you state the vision, and I remember talking about this last meeting, the vision is really general in the document. But yet what you put up on, you had a slide that talked about the division, it was much more detailed than what's actually in the document. And I think it's more important, instead of having just a general, welcoming, distinctive, and uniquely Lake Forest, I think it needs to be beefed up a little bit more, because we're also talking about mix of uses. I mean, this lays it out much better than what you have in the document. So I'm just wondering if you can, is it in our best interest to add to that vision and kind of include more of these than what you have in the document?
What page are you referring to?
Based on what you're saying,
Page
would
2
it
right
be
here.
helpful if, because certainly these themes are pulled from the vision,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe at the end of the vision, we could summarize those, summarize it in something that's simpler to read. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah,
If-
because you have just, it says the vision is welcoming, distinctive, and uniquely Lake Forest. That doesn't really tell me much. It's pretty general. This tells me more.
We
You see what
can
I'm saying?
certainly
Okay.
incorporate kind of a bullet point summary in the vision as well.
Okay, all right. Let's see. Okay, I have some more, couple more questions here. So, one time, last time, I talked about transportation and kind of thinking really big ideas, because we're talking 20 years in the future. And I had mentioned something about a light rail option, and I didn't see it referenced anywhere in here. I know that's big ticket, that's really big, big idea, but if we're talking 20 years in the future, I thought maybe we might mention something different other than just vehicles moving around and buses. Just wondering if you might consider adding something like that into the plan.
Certainly, if the commission as a whole thinks that that's appropriate, we can certainly add a reference.
Talked about that last time, and I just thought, it's good to get that idea out there. I mean, who knows what funding will be like in the future, and who knows, but if you can put a light rail along highways, we have such direct access to O'Hare. If we had a light rail option there, or a light rail out to Vernon Hills or up to Gurnee, I don't know, it's something in the future that I thought we might talk about.
And perhaps the language actually is more expansive. Light rail 20 years from now might not be the solution, so
Right.
perhaps we could add
Something-
language that talks about, I don't know, being visionary, taking advantage of new technologies. So
Something
if,
not so automobile-driven, something different. I mean, we
if
got
the
the
commission
pedestrian.
directs that, we can certainly incorporate that.
Okay. Let's see, did you want to go on to someone else for questions? I have a few more.
No.
Okay. Sorry. Let's see. And did we mention in this, I saw it just briefly mentioned, but I want to make sure that we highlighted that we are encouraging adaptive reuse of the landmark mansion on that one parcel. What is that parcel? You had mentioned it in the document a little bit, but are you advocating for that in the document?
The way the document is written, it certainly acknowledges the opportunity for adaptive reuse. In the discussions to date, there hasn't been any suggestion that we do more than really provide for that option. We certainly know that 8.5 acres isn't of significant size, and if we really want to achieve the type of amenities that the office park wants, that structure may not be appropriately located or may not. So from the discussions to date, there was not a strong feeling that and again, this doesn't mandate, so it was identified as an option, but nothing more than that.
Okay, so you're trying to encourage adaptive reuse of the historic structure, is that what I'm getting?
That's certainly an option as part of the process.
Okay. And then I also was wondering, we talked at length about high density, and you even mentioned high density, possibility of high density residential units, but I don't see it added into the document. So was there a portion that I was missing that you were going to encourage?
I think
High
we talked
density?
about moderate density or alternate housing types. Remember, this doesn't, I mean, high density might mean one thing to someone and something different to someone else. This certainly talks about providing different housing options, which could include different housing types. It could include ownership rental. It could include different densities. That would really be determined if there were zone changes later, or more likely as a development came forward. But again, this sets the stage really for greater flexibility overall in that area.
Well, that's why I'm wondering, why wouldn't you include it? Because if you do from high, moderate, and, single-family 1 acre lots, wouldn't that give you the range and more flexibility?
We could certainly add that, or we could just make it clearer that residential development at varying densities.
I think it does say, I mean, she talks about flexible housing products on page 4 of 7 under sub 3, A and B. So, I mean, I think if we're talking high density is, in my opinion, with all due respect, more specificity. And I think it's more broadly stated with flexible housing options and it tries to list those. So I understand your point. I think,
Make sure it's flexible enough.
yeah, right.
To include apartments as opposed to just maybe duplexes or whatever.
Right.
Okay. Then I also remember talking about having a consistent wooded setback all along 60, not changing. I thought we discussed that a lot. And so now you're just sticking with allowing setback to vary.
We heard very loudly and clearly that if in fact we're going to support commercial development, bring in the types of amenities that the office, the businesses in the office park want, that we need to make sure that those commercial businesses are viable. And to have a wooded setback from Route 60 immediately adjacent to commercial development, it just simply isn't workable. Excuse me. So rather than, again, to try and set out some clear expectations, the plan states that in a very limited area, very specific sites, when uses are brought forward that are consistent with the preferred uses in the plan or serve to enhance the office park, and when a high-quality site plan is brought forward, that serious consideration should be given to reducing the setback in a very limited area. So not broadly, and I think the plan tries to be very clear on that.
Okay. And the other thing I was asking last time about including the sidewalk on both sides all along 60, and I don't see it on the circulation plan.
We
And I
had
remember,
an updated draft to the circulation plan, and it didn't get in here.
oh, okay.
I thought it was included on that updated draft, but I do recall you saying that, and that was our intent.
Oh, okay, because, yeah, it's not listed here. It goes just for a little bit, but yeah, we
I
had
thought
talked about
that a sidewalk on the south side was included from Old Bridge Road. The concept was included from Old Bridge Road to Saunders. And maybe it's not reflected on that.
It is, but
Okay.
we had talked about including it all the way on the south side, just to allow for the residents to, have more pedestrian access.
I think it was stopped at Saunders because there is no connection. The connection across the tollway is on the north side.
Right, but
So
it didn't
to-
go any further. Okay. Let's see, any other question? Oh, I had another question too, there was something about streamlining the process for preferred uses in site plans and architectural designs. Because I'm just wondering about that, does that mean that they skip board and commission review and just go straight to development? They go from you to development?
Again, these are high-level concepts, so this doesn't speak to exactly what would happen. Certainly, if a plan comes in consistent with the vision established in the comprehensive plan, the expectation would be that when it came to the plan commission, if a subdivision was needed or a lot consolidation or a special use permit, it would come to the plan commission automatically. But the intent is really to look at our code. Are there times when, yes, we could simply move development forward more quickly? We could eliminate some part of the process. But I think the bigger idea with that is once we get something in the comprehensive plan, that really establishes a framework to allow you and the city council to move projects forward without 5 meetings or 3 meetings.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we don't skip the public review, the board and commission review, because,
The comprehensive plan can't mandate that. That would have to come through a later amendment to the code.
okay. All right, I'll stop. I'm done.
Commissioner Moorhead?
The Conway Office Park is called first class and world class in the updated plan. And my question is, why is it characterized that way? Is it because of the tenant occupant mix or the current amenities, or both?
The park refers to itself as a first-class office park, so we respect that identification. But yes, we certainly have global players in that office park. It was always developed with the intent of assuring high-quality buildings. Certainly, it is a bit dated with respect to what's desired now, but I think that's also the vision, is that Conway Park really remain or become a first-class office park, if you don't think it is one now.
Okay. No, I was just curious because it was used but not defined. Also, out of curiosity, the revenue to the city is the revenue to the city from the office park greater than the revenue from the residential areas of within this plan? Do you know the answer to that?
Say that, is
Well,
the
in
property tax generation from Conway Park itself, is that greater than the other areas citywide or just in this
Just
corridor?
within this plan?
Yes, the property tax revenues generated by Conway Park is significant.
Okay. Then for opportunity area number 3, which is that property in the southeast corner of Route 60 and Saunders Road, just out of curiosity, was a tree survey ever done on that property?
Yes, many, many years ago. I know there has been a lot of change in the trees since, but yes. And the current plan for that property, there is a current approved plan. That entire 40 acres was approved as a planned development. And the current plan actually does approve removal of a significant number of trees. There are some preserved wetlands in the southeast corner of that property and some other wooded areas. But yes, an overall tree survey was done for the entire 40 acres and for that property specifically.
Okay. And then on that same opportunity, in that same opportunity area number 3, the setbacks, in preparing for tonight, I was reviewing the history of what would happen in 2013, 2014 approximately with the Conway Market development, which was the Whole Foods development, and the issue there, one of the main issues was setbacks. And in my experience, and in my humble opinion, any development on this property, the devil's going to be in the details, particularly with setbacks. And so my question is, setbacks probably aren't really appropriate for the comprehensive plan, but at which point in the process, how is that going to be addressed? Is it going to be done by a revision to the zoning code then, so there's some certainty?
The 150-foot setback on the Amberley Woods property, I believe, is actually reflected on the plat of subdivision. So the comprehensive plan sets out the concept that in order to have successful commercial, the 150-foot setback would need to be reduced. The exact setback that would remain is something that would come before the Plan Commission. When this property comes in for development, it is approved through a special use permit right now. So whatever happens on this property will likely require some amendments to the current subdivision plat and an amendment to the special use permit to allow a different mix of uses than is currently provided for. And that site plan would identify likely buildable areas, parking areas, any areas that we're going to be dedicated to berming to screen neighboring residential, and would identify what happens in that streetscape area. So it would be part of your discussion when a development plan comes before you.
Okay. And then with respect to the Everett House, or whatever it's commonly referred to now, the historic mansion, and with regard to adaptive reuse, I don't know enough details about historic tax credits, but do you know, would federal or state historic tax credits be available for an adaptive reuse of that, or an adaptive reuse of the facade?
Possibly. The property is designated as a local landmark, so there may be some opportunity. I think it will just depend on what the overall use is that is proposed for that property, and whether that structure fits in or could be incorporated into a development, or whether it's just sited in a way that isn't workable. But possibly there could be some opportunity for tax credit or property tax freeze. That would all need to be explored.
Okay. And is the city generally supportive of helping facilitate that with a developer? I know that's more on the developer end, but
Yes.
okay. And then last questions on opportunity area number 2, which is the one next to Academy Drive, I think it's called. Open Lands is involved, Lake Forest Open Lands is involved with that property. And my question is there a conservation easement on that land?
To my knowledge, there's not a conservation easement on the property.
Okay.
The train club is an existing, non-conforming grandfathered use, but to my knowledge, there isn't a conservation easement on the property. And Open Lands has indicated an openness to having discussions
Okay.
about that area as a whole.
Okay, and that segues into my last question. On that same property, in the existing plan and in the revisions to the plan, it's kind of aspirational discussions of this property and doing something with it, but is it for sale, or is the city contemplating eminent domain, or are they just going to try to facilitate?
The city is not contemplating eminent domain.
Okay.
I don't want that. But certainly you'll hear from the property owner, and as you did at the last meeting, I think the property is for sale. I think there are some challenges that require some discussions among various parties, and
Okay.
certainly that there's been some efforts in that direction over the past 20 years, and to date, we don't have a successful resolution.
Okay. That's all I had.
Thank you. Commissioner Ruggles?
Kathy, I just hope to get a clarification on one of the items, and it's under the entrance gateway paragraph, and it's line item number, or letter I. And I was wondering if you can comment on how the city might be able to establish the standards for the design, materials, functionality, and sustainability for the elements within the gateway area.
Again, coming out of this, the city could certainly amend the code to talk specifically about certain elements or materials, or that could be done as a development comes forward. It is a bit hard to think about what that gateway is without understanding what the larger plan is for the development. Is it a pond? Is it a significant building? Is it an outdoor area for a building? I think we would probably not want someone coming over the tollway and just seeing a sea of parking. Could there be a tree canopy reestablished, or, I don't think we will, I think having the city jump out in front and say that that corner needs to look exactly like this is probably approaching it a bit backwards. I think we need to work closely with the developer and develop a plan that really does what this plan talks about, just tries to tie it to something else in Lake Forest, or a feeling of high-quality architecture, distinctive architecture, high-quality natural materials. And I don't know that we can say exactly what that's going to be at this point.
So it seems like it's giving the developer a little bit of flexibility in their vision of what those properties could be, and then bringing it back in front of the, our community boards to further the discussion.
Yes, again, the intent is not to take away private property rights, but to provide some guidance that if you move in this direction, and if you really think through the plan, then we should be able to move you through and move forward with development.
Yeah, I mean, some of the items that are listed, as, guidelines in the comprehensive plan, I mean, they actually, lay out some very appropriate suggestions as to, like, if you're going to have a setback reduction, you need to have, let's see, what does it say? Quality architecture and landscaping, offer a mix of restaurants, hospitality, provide public amenities, pathways, et cetera. So it is kind of laying out to the developers that this is more than, we want more than just a parking lot and, one building. So I think it's important to give some guideline to those people that want to come into our community and make our community grow. That's all I had.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. I have a couple of comments regarding the wording of the vision for the future. And so perhaps, I should ask you, do any of the commissioners have any additional questions at this time? So perhaps we can move into questions and requests for clarification from the commission. Okay. And I'm going to refer to the Route 60 Entrance Corridor, A Vision for the Future document, page 2 at the top. Conway Park is a vitally important economic engine for the city and is of critical importance to the city's tax base. Then it goes on to say, the Route 60 Entrance Corridor, Conway Park and the surrounding area remains attractive to existing and new businesses. Just suggests a few word changes, which I'm open to comment on, or improvement. But have the surrounding area continues to be attractive to existing and new businesses, organizations, and institutions, period. And with appropriate corporate and owner stewardship, as well as community support, it should continue to be attractive long into the future. Attractive and successful. Wording, I'm sure others might improve upon that, but to acknowledge that it is an office park that sets Lake Forest off from some of its neighboring communities because of the quality of the tenancy there, the ownership. And certainly, the presence of those corporations adds to the stature of the city as a whole, not simply the tax base, in my humble opinion. And I did like the language regarding the setbacks, if others have read it, which allows the Plan Commission and other bodies in the city to really look at an attractive development as a whole on that site, keeping in mind that we would like to have some amenities that would further the success of the Conway Office Park.
I would agree with that. I like the wording the way it is on page 5, under the gateway there in regards to the setbacks. It basically talks about the balance, basically, that needs, and the trade-off, I think is the
Right.
word that's used there. So I think that's good, broad language that tries to capture the vision of the setbacks as well as the potential for future development.
Do commission members have any other comments or clarification from city staff?
You know, Kathy, I have just a question on page 2 of 7, and it says the corridor is active with walkers and bikers, employees, residents, and visitors during the week and on the weekends. Is it the whole corridor, or is it just the office park, or Route 60? Because I don't really see that.
I think the vision is that the corridor would be, and that if we can make that connection from Academy Drive west and take advantage of the setbacks and create pedestrian paths or bicycle paths that aren't right on Route 60, but perhaps take advantage of that setback and meander, that the vision is that the area would be active.
So instead of saying the corridor is active, maybe saying the corridor could be active.
And I think the vision is intended to be stated kind of in an active voice.
Okay. Yeah, because that was confusing to me, because I thought you meant
Well, it
currently.
might not be
and-
consistent, but we can
Yeah.
certainly go through and wordsmith it further.
Yeah, because it just seems like it currently is, and I don't think that's really the case right now. Okay.
Any other comments, suggestions from the commission to staff? Then I just want to clarify with Kathy, because I think when we began the discussion on Route 60, it wasn't necessary to swear people in for testimony from the public. Is that still the case?
Because this is not a development petition, people are just commenting on this draft document. So,
Okay. So then, we will open it up to public testimony, and if anyone else would like to speak, other than those who've already submitted their requests, please do so at this time, and you can pass those into Kathy. I am inviting comments from the public, and we ask that each speaker will have up to 5 minutes to speak. And if you believe your comments are repetitive in any way by others stated previously, you can simply state your agreement with the previous comments. There's no need to repeat comments, and I request that you please be respectful of other speakers and all points of view, and please refrain from clapping or criticizing other speakers. Keith Krebs.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Keith Krebs, and I live at 1815 Amberley Court. Just wanted to point out that the map that's up on the screen right now is different than the map in the hard copies, at least in the back of the room.
I think
the numbers 4 and 5?
I think the rest is,
Right,
Yeah,
so whatever is final, just in the final draft, the numbers and the comments on land use need to match up, so we're talking about the right,
they couldn't get the other PDF.
Right
so I
things.
should have mentioned that.
all right, thank you. And the second area of comment, I guess, is I have a unique perspective, I believe, as, living in one of those homes on the 24 lots for the last 7.5 years. So I've seen a fair number of people stop by while I've been out working in my yard or working on my bicycle or whatever. And even had a couple people just come and ring the doorbell and you want to ask questions. Number one frequently asked question is about the traffic flow. So I think the cul-de-sac would go a long ways to improving the developability and the saleability of those 24 homes or the other 19. The second most asked question that I get is, what's going to go in on that lot 3? So again, some maybe tighter guidelines around that, I think, go a long ways to increasing the developability and saleability of those other 19 homes. And then just comment about, I would just urge, I know we're not talking about zoning or any zoning changes here, just going slow, because I think if those 2 changes are made, the cul-de-sac and some understanding of what might go in on lot 3, that it won't take much change in product, maybe just a tweaking of the homes to make them more like empty nester homes, because there's almost no yards there. There's very small yards. So people with families and young kids are not probably going to move into, those kinds of homes. They may, but it's probably not as likely. So we ought to get the product right for empty nesters, which means probably a little smaller size and probably first floor masters. And most of the plans for those other 19 homes right now don't have first floor masters in there. So I think we just got to sync some of that up and understand who the most likely purchaser of those homes might be. So those would be my comments on that. And then the last one, I guess, is just, I don't know, maybe it's a wild idea. I don't know what's going on with the whole Waukegan Road thing, but that darker blue spot on the east of the railroad track on the south of Route 60, which is now, the recycling center. What if, a fire department, is moved into that location that might open up some developability on Waukegan Road. A lot has changed since 9/11 in the last 19 years, and probably a worst case scenario from a response time standpoint would be, something like, this isn't prophecy and I wouldn't wish it upon anybody, but like an active shooter situation in the office park or at the municipal services or at the Bears practice facility. That's probably the longest response time of anywhere in the city to get emergency personnel to. So, maybe moving that if, we can play a chess game, because we do own that property. So that's something that, something that could be done if that made sense with what's going on Waukegan Road and some of these other things. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Tremulous.
Good evening. Again, it's Peter Tremulous. I live in Deerfield, Illinois, and really have been just following your update of the comprehensive plan for the last couple of weeks now, so appreciate the opportunity to speak. Couple thoughts, and you touched on, Plan Commissioner Moore had discussed this in his comment this evening. It's been something I've been thinking about as well. Some comprehensive plans do fiscal impact analysis to try to help guide the long-range financial impact of the development of the remaining properties or the redevelopment of some of the properties within the area that's the subject of this comprehensive plan update. And those can kind of be instrumental in terms of helping guide future development and intensity of development and the trade-offs between putting new infrastructure in certain areas of this plan and how to pay for it, in essence, through tax revenue and other user fees, retail sales taxes, those type of things. So I'd almost recommend doing at least one page, maybe 2, on fiscal impact analysis and really put some numbers in the plan so you guys can actually appreciate some, dollars and cents figures here, because I think if you do have the opportunity to densify your office park, that would be a huge opportunity for adding EAV out here that would help drive an economic engine to do more impact or more improvements to the area that would be public improvements. And one of the areas for public improvement that I think would be helpful is actually kind of updating this a little bit for some of the improvements that are already out there. I know this base map probably hasn't really been updated for quite a long time. But for instance, at Academy Drive, that is a 4-way intersection today, and it's signalized. This drawing actually doesn't even show the south leg of that intersection, and it really should, to help kind of clarify for you what the potential impact of development for that intersection could be. And Academy Drive today, as it's shown there, it may be private, but I think one of the goals of the comprehensive plan, at least for the southern third of it, should be ultimately making that a publicly dedicated right-of-way, and kind of incorporating access for parcel 2 off of that roadway. And I think that should be one of your stated goals in the comprehensive plan. The other piece of infrastructure that I think would be very helpful would be a connection from Academy Drive over to and through the Packaging Corporation of America site to the main entrance to Conway, the eastern entrance to Conway. Just like any heart organ, you need good vascular circulation to help provide, a healthy, kind of a healthy circulation for the organ. And since the office park is kind of the organ that's driving the economics out here, adding that third leg to get folks in and out of the office park at Academy Drive ultimately does help the office park substantially, and it would open up the opportunity for parcel 2 then to be a fairly intense, and I'll use the word high-density residential development plan, along with a mixed-use retail component along its frontage, potentially with additional restaurants on the train parcel. I also am not exactly sure that the train parcel, the open lands train parcel, I'm not actually sure that the train use itself has ever been permitted by the city of Lake Forest. And I think that's at least worth an investigation by the Plan Commission to go back and actually look at whether or not that quote-unquote non-conforming grandfathered use actually is grandfathered under any authority from the city of Lake Forest, because I'm pretty sure the hobbyists that are out there have not come before you for permits ever, or the city council. So I think it's important that you guys do, if you do exercise jurisdiction over that property, that you kind of reassert your jurisdiction over it, because you may have unwittingly allowed that to kind of perpetuate without actually complying with your local codes and ordinances. So I think that's important. I think thirdly, I do think if you're going to invest in a comprehensive plan, one of the better, I've worked with 40 different municipalities on 100 different developments in my career in Chicago here, and visual preference surveys are a very powerful tool to help provide suggestions and examples of the type of development that you might want to see on these various parcels that are remaining to be developed here. And a visual preference survey, if you're not familiar with it, it actually allows you as the plan commissioners, as well as members of the community, to select images to incorporate in the planning document itself that are examples of what you might like to see in terms of the quality of the developments. And as we all know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I'd encourage you to include more pictures of examples of the types of developments that you admire and think would be fitting for Lake Forest for the parcels that are the subject of this comprehensive plan update. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kurt Kakusik?
1165 Mount Vernon. Community is a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. A couple weeks ago, my wife took our daughter over to neighborhood over by South Park, and there was a very quiet community of snowmen. Very cool, right? Community. We chose Lake Forest for the taxes, which are the lowest on the North Shore, schools, which you really can't go wrong, and for me personally, lake access. Since I've lived here for just under 5 years and being a member of caucus, we were introduced to the idea through a question of how does Lake Forest differ from other communities? And the answer was the civic mindedness and duty of Lake Foresters. It's not their principle or their pinnacle of their career, it's rather the overall view and betterment of the whole. So what have I heard during these meetings? Property values are declining. Save the business park, which I'm pretty sure if there was a water tower, someone would have tagged that. And millennials. Well, millennials want localism community, but Lake Forest also provides that as well. So the real question then becomes, what is the focus of the Route 60 Planning Commission? What's the realistic impact of affordable housing for the acreage available, considering that option 1 is pretty much off the table because who wants to live in the middle of a business park? Option 2 is a possibility. Option 3 isn't a possibility because the commercial aspects are way greater than residential, which pretty much leaves 4, which we've heard are 19 leftover sites, and then there's 5, which may be a swamp. And I think it all depends upon the acreage and the zoning. Right now, it's all currently zoned as single family. Knowing Lake Forest in 5 years, what's the likelihood that we're going to get high density for those areas? While I think it's great that the business park wants residents to live close by, I think it's unrealistic, to be honest. Which then goes into, does the business park and their wants and needs provide more tax revenue long-term than the residential? What's in the betterment of the whole for the long term? Is the energy best spent making business park attractive to younger people and companies? Maybe we still attract the millennials, but we go after the millennial businesses rather than the millennial families themselves. Can a millennial business park do a better job of hedging the bet against businesses leaving the state of Illinois, which is out of our control to a point? Will a millennial business park open more potential new residents to seriously consider Lake Forest for the same reasons that we chose it, for the same reasons that millennials are looking for that community and that Lake Forest already provides? I know in talking to my wife tonight, we are joking that a goal of ours would be get our neighbors that we've met, hop on our bikes, stop at what may replace Little Tails for a beverage, maybe take that new bike path over to the business park, have dinner, a couple drinks, and ride back. It's really not what the majority of Lake Forest seems to think about, but it's the fun that's missing. Based upon my face-to-face over the past 5 years, my concerns are this. There's a certain mindset of a 1950s vision that in a way is contributing to those concerns that we have in Lake Forest, or the death zone, as we call it, of downtown Lake Forest. As an example, people go to Lake Bluff, they go to Highwood because it's fun. Downtown Lake Forest isn't fun, and someone is preventing that from happening. So as a challenge to the commission, you can't change the mindset of Lake Forest. You can provide an opportunity along Route 60 for residents to see the potential and a starting point to manage the fear of change and thus start shifting their mindset for more fun and inclusion. I'm glad I'm not in your seats. But you've got a hell of a task ahead of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda Liang.
Hi, I'm Linda Liang from 75 South Asbury Court, and I want to first thank you for all the work you're doing. I think this is a really important issue in Lake Forest and very important for the vibrancy of our community in the future. And I also thank the commissioners for their detailed questions and some of their comments, because I could certainly agree with a lot of them, so thank you. Just a few things I noticed is a plan and a vision is an overall plan. Like, I think of Daniel Burnham and his 7 islands for Chicago and his beautiful plan. And I know there's a whole plan, but it seems like we're doing it a little bit piecemeal, and maybe that's because of what I see, that we're looking at the corridor, and then what about the Old Kelly Estate? You know, what about some of these other places, the Waukegan Road with Sunset? So we should have a, what's missing for me is a sense and a feel of what our community is. Like, it's elegant, it's architecturally significant, it's historically, you know, that's a vision. So that, a little bit of that is missing for me. A couple of other things. I really like, Susie, what you said about the consistent setback, because I think of a mouthful of teeth with one tooth sticking way out, so that if we have one building that's even right on the edge, it's going to look weird. And if we really look at those parcels, it's only 2 and 3 that are right on the corridor. And I understand that we may have to sacrifice something to allow commercial developers to have enough square footage. We don't have huge parcels of land. We're already pretty developed. So that's what makes this a challenge in terms of the vision and the consistency and the feel and the texture and the architecture and even the materials and the plantings. We're filling cavities, if you will. But I think of a corridor, and I think of places I've traveled to, like a Marble Arch or pillars or even little things that we have in Lake Forest. And I hate to use East Chicago, Indiana as an example, but when you drive to the steel mill, that main street in that town has these beautiful gas lights, and you think, where did this come from? It's definitely a welcome corridor. There's nothing like that on 60, absolutely nothing. And we can say, yes, the developers will help us, but we need a unifying, like when you think of the Riverwalk in San Antonio or something, there's nothing that ties together all these pieces, like pillars or lights or archways or statues, or just think of the Prague Bridge. It's gorgeous. You know, it has a consistent plan all the way down. And if we really want this to be a welcoming corridor, we're missing that piece, I think. Just something I thought of. A couple of concerns are, with the zoning done on a case-by-case basis, like you said, as long as there's oversight and it's not a pass-through, I think that's good. The community likes to be involved, we care. Water drainage, I don't know who's responsible for that, but there were some issues when Stonebridge was built in Conway with the pipe being too small and multiple pipes draining into our pipe, and adding more hardscape is not going to help that. So that's a big concern of mine. Traffic issues is another concern, and I don't know where they exactly belong, but I think they're important issues. They don't belong in the vision, but they belong somewhere. And then the last one is, when I read about, you know, there's some really nice parts of the vision about the character of the office park and the plantings and the landscape and everything, but we don't talk much about maintaining the character of the residential pieces. And there's a lot of residents that live there, including me. And so if we're putting in bike paths and walkways, are we still maintaining the character of the residential part of those parcels? as well as the office park. So that's all I have to say, but thank you so much, and I appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you. Deborah Fisher?
Hi, I'm Deborah Fisher, and I'm a realtor in Lake Forest. And I started with the process actually prior to the Route 60 corridor meeting, if you remember when the original proposal was put before you for what is parcel 3 on here. And then that was put on hold to do the Route 60 process. That was originally requested for, at least on the southern 3-acre portion of it, for an assisted living facility, or for a senior living facility. So we've kind of, in the process, come full circle on this. And the one thing that I would really like you to think about is in the language here where it talks on page 4 of 7, plan for a range of housing types in the corridor designed consistent with quality and character of Lake Forest. If you go down to number 3, what I think we're attempting to do here is create a visionary plan that will be plus or minus 20 years out. I guess I don't see discouraging age-restricted housing anywhere in this corridor, frankly, whether it's on 3 or some other place that becomes a site for it. I just think that what my original, conversation was back then, we have a huge need for that. We're 20 years from now, the need is only going to be exponentially more. We don't have any of that product available right now. It's built, but it's sold out. Everybody who's trying to get in or get family members in is on wait list only. So I just would love to see maybe C go away. Just take, we already talk in A and B about residential housing. It's that, housing products, encourage flexible housing products. I just think that kind of covers it, and I don't see a need for discouraging it. It may not be something that you want in the short term. I get that. I hear that. But again, I just don't think in a plan that's supposed to be visionary that we have to pull that out. I just think it's somewhat short-sighted because we really don't know what's going to come down the pike within the next 20 years. And I do think that we should be more flexible about what kind of housing we want to put there. So that's number 1. Number 2, regarding the setbacks, I do agree that we really need to be, as this language calls for, we need to be open on the idea of the commercial setbacks, reducing them. We are looking at a millennial market. The millennial market is typically coming from urban places, and I can tell you as a realtor that they come up here and they can't see, we do a great job of having trees and setbacks and things like that, which is just sort of the opposite of what they're really used to and looking for. So not only on the corridor, but let's say that you decide to put in more retail or more something in Conway itself at some point. I think you need to look at it with the idea that not everybody wants to be behind trees or walls of trees. The greenery, all of that doesn't build that kind of sense of vitality. I think they want to see life, they want to see vitality, they want to see commercial commerce, they don't want it hidden. We get very dark in the winter, it's even harder. So a lot of the ability to walk around and everything gets even harder if you have to walk through a long setback. We see that with the college kids in East Lake Forest. That walk from the college to downtown is kind of surprising for them. It's dark and it's long in terms of those kids that are coming out of the urban areas of Chicago or wherever. So again, I think just keep open minds on the fact that a lot of the people that are coming here are not necessarily just like us. And then the third thing, just regarding the old house on the property on Lot 3, or on the Opportunity Zone Lot 3, I think the language that calls for allowing adaptive reuse is fine. Encouraging it, or anything that gets more structured that says we should do this as adaptive reuse or something, I just don't think is appropriate because as Kathy said, location, you just don't really know that. I remember that in that first meeting, Rick Swanson, who'd been living in it for several years, said he spent most of his time, pumping out the basement because it's not necessarily in the greatest of shape. And there's even an online long discussion by Arthur Miller, who said that he has no problem, with Arthur Miller, the historian, the architectural historian. He said he has no problem with that property going down. So just things I ask you to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all the slips I have for people requesting to speak. Anyone else interested in speaking? Then at this point, public testimony is closed. We have final questions from the commission to the staff or direction to the staff, and any requests for additional information. Let's start with Commissioner Ruggles.
I don't have any additional questions.
Commissioner Moorhead,
I don't have anything else.
Commissioner Athenson.
You're saying additional questions?
At this point, it's questions for the petitioner, in this case, city staff, or requests for additional information.
I guess I'm just curious about that. I know we've talked about this so much, but that railroad, when it's grandfathered, and the idea that it has to be permitted, as one gentleman from Deerfield said. Do you have any comment on that?
The input that we have received, and we have talked about it for many years, is that the use predated, and the property coming into the city, the use was relocated from another site. So it is a grandfathered use. If it was to be discontinued, then it could not be reestablished. But we have certainly had many discussions with the city attorney about it. And again, Open Lands is the owner of that property today, and they have expressed interest. The city is certainly willing to facilitate a meeting if the parties are interested in coming together. The Academy, Open Lands, Mr. Maservi, anyone from the office park, we're certainly willing to facilitate that discussion.
But the city has no control over it then, is it? I mean, they have no control over what happens on that property, basically.
If something were to change on the Open Lands property, if that use was discontinued,
Then you'd have control.
yes. The property today is zoned R5, which is in the code, R5 is identified as a holding zone when property is annexed without a development plan. When that property was annexed, the R5 zoning district was applied to it as a holding zone. The current comprehensive plan provides for a variety of uses on that site. The proposed comprehensive plan expands that to include additional uses. So certainly, if any development occurred, it would likely need to come before the Plan Commission as for subdivision or special use permit or a zone change, depending on what's proposed.
Okay.
But the city will continue to reach out and try and bring parties together and have a discussion about the future of that site.
Commissioner Dixon?
Yeah, I just would follow up on that last question. I mean, I think that the points that were made and the point that Commissioner Atherton just made too, the access and encourage those discussions, I think that is key, and whether that gets incorporated into the plan or not, I think that certainly should be incorporated, if nothing else, in the minutes, how that needs to be encouraged, because that's a vital component to that parcel number 2. I have a question, or two more questions. The first one is, and I missed the last meeting, but on page 4 of 7, paragraph 3, sub C, where and it just was brought up, the discouraging of the age-restricted housing, and I don't mean to spark another discussion, but, you know, the purpose of that being in there is what? Or could you remind me or refresh me as to why that
We
paragraph
heard
is in there?
very loudly and clearly through the process that we have very limited land, particularly with frontage right on Route 60. And that land is best used to provide the amenities that the office park desires. Keep in mind that the comprehensive plan does not limit or does not prevent someone from coming forward with a proposal for age-restricted housing. But there was concern about using the few remaining prime properties with frontage on Route 60 for a use that really doesn't add to the vitality of Conway Park.
Okay. Certainly want to support those businesses, but also, you know, if there's a need for the development of that, or an opportunity to develop that, it would be, you know, to restrict or to limit or discourage that, I guess I would question, but if everybody else is fine with that, we can leave it. And then, where do we address the historical property that, that the house, where's that addressed here?
It's mentioned somewhere in here, I need to look.
I couldn't find
Son.
it either.
It's on page 5 of 6 of the land use designation descriptions and opportunity areas.
Okay, middle of the page.
Adaptive reuse. The third
The
paragraph.
area presents the opportunity to create a well-designed landmark at the entrance to the city, and this is opportunity area number 3, the 8.5-acre Amberley Woods parcel. Whether through all new construction to support a mix of one or more uses, hospitality, commercial, and employee-targeted housing, or through some combination of adaptive reuse of the existing historic residence and new construction. So again, it recognizes the historic structure. It does not mandate, but it calls out the opportunity for at least consideration of incorporating that as part of some type of adaptive reuse.
Yeah, I would just, I think, I mean, I think the way it is written now, that it says that the historic residence has to remain, or that's the feeling that it's giving there. I think that, you know, we certainly would, there'd be more flexibility if it was made clear that it doesn't necessarily have to remain. And I think the city has a track record of entertaining, when appropriate for developmental purposes, you know, the need to remove what was once considered a historic residence for the, if there is a development opportunity and all else is equal.
I think that's gone too far because it's already considered a local landmark.
I understand that.
So you'd have to take that all away.
Yeah,
right?
no, I understand
Yeah.
that, for sure, I understand that, but I don't, and the city's got, you know, there's precedent for removing those landmarks, and I think that, you know, that certainly could be considered to remove that if a development is appropriate in that space. I think the flexibility needs to be there, in my opinion.
Okay, we can talk about that.
And sorry, could you cite that particular reference again, please?
Page 5 of 6, we're looking at the
Is that what I got there?
third full paragraph, or I guess it's the 4th paragraph. The paragraph that starts, the area presents the opportunity to create a well-designed landmark, and then, you know, specifically, it's about the 3rd or 4th line down.
Okay. It's in this.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have any other questions for staff?
No, I have no other questions.
Okay, I have a few questions for staff with some of the issues that were raised by the public, and I think it's clarification of how the city would address some of the issues raised. For instance, at Amberley, the first floor master bedrooms, I mean, if other potential developers or property owners come in and want to make those changes, how would that be done within the city?
I believe there's been 3 different developers involved in the Amberley Courtyard homes, those 24 homes. I think that they have come back before the Building Review Board for revision to those homes 4 or 5 times. So that, if the plan is going to significantly change, if the lot configurations or the roadway is going to change in a way other than simply terminating it at the west end, then it would come before the Plan Commission. If the massing or form or materials or architectural detailing on the house is going to change significantly, that would be before the Building Review Board. If the exterior of the house remains generally the same and the interior configuration changes, that does not require any special approval other than coming in for a building permit.
Thank you. And then fiscal impact of developments, I mean, it's my understanding that that's really the purview of the city council and not the plan commission.
And normally fiscal impact statements are required at the time a specific development proposal is brought forward.
Okay. And then Mr. Tremulous did note that we don't have the south leg of Academy Drive with the new fields.
We can certainly add that.
That would be
I made
great.
that
Thank you. Ms. Liang mentioned an entrance element, which I know is in our document. Would you like to expand upon that at all?
I think as I mentioned before, I think that would be defined as we know what's going to happen on that 8.5 acre parcel. I think it's hard to prejudge that or predetermine it. I don't know that, having a series of archways, certainly Conway Park, both of those entrances at Field Drive and Field Court, those entrances are defined by substantial pillars. The entrance to Conway Farms is defined in an understated way with signage. So I think those tend to come forward, and there may be a theme or something that comes forward as we look at extending pedestrian pathways or lighting fixtures as we look at a new development on the Amberley parcel. But I think it's difficult to predetermine that.
Okay. And then are there any other comments you would like to add, given the statements from the public?
I would note that the city has used the visual preference survey technique in the past, and sometimes it has worked well, and other times it really hasn't, because so often as we pull those visual images from other communities, the reaction we get is, no, we don't want that. So certainly a tool that we use, but we also use our architectural review board to help define those aspects. I think those are all the comments I have at this point.
All right. Thank you. Then at this point, we will have commission discussion and comment. Commissioner Dixon?
I guess I would just go back to the comment that I just made in regards to the land use designation descriptions and opportunity areas on page 5 of 6, and putting something in there about, and it would have to be wordsmith, but putting something in there about, the removal of the historical residence if appropriate.
Which document are you reading from? We have 3 different.
I'm reading from the Route 60 entrance corridor
Okay.
land use designation descriptions and opportunity areas, page 5 of 6, the fourth full paragraph that starts, "The area presents the opportunity to create a well-designed landmark." And in there, it references the historical residence, and all I'm saying is that there should be something in there about if the, allowing the, if appropriate, and under certain circumstances and after full, I mean, it would have to be wordsmith, but something in there that references the willingness to remove the residence if appropriate. And I'm not advocating the removal of it. I'm, I would encourage the historical building to remain, but if, we heard comments tonight here about the disrepair of it. I have no idea what state that building is in, and I don't make any comment on that, but certainly there is precedent here within the city. You had Barrett College, which was, designated historical landmark. Decision was made after several years and a lot of angst about the removal of that building. So all I'm saying is that it should be considered, and maybe others are going to disagree with me, but I think something should be put in there that would reference that.
I agree with Commissioner Dixon on that. I read all new construction, and the second line is implying the removal of the house, and if it's appropriate, I think that's fine. So adding more specific language would be fine. I would, ideally, in my own land use world, the developer of that parcel would be able to incorporate that building or the facade, kind of like Jewelers Row down on Wabash in Chicago, the facade with the development behind it. And that would be kind of the entrance statement, the gateway into this area. But it's a theory and an idea, whether it works practically. So I agree. The short answer.
And I disagree. So I was actually going to advocate that we add underneath section 2, identify opportunity areas, to add an F to encourage adaptive reuse of landmark estate. Because you mentioned Barra, and unfortunately that's really considered a failure of the city in trying to do some adaptive reuse of that building. And Lake Forest is really known for they pride themselves on the historic preservation of our old landmark buildings. And that's really how we differentiate ourselves as a community. And if we go down the slippery slope of getting that language of like, oh, it's landmark, but you can get rid of it if it doesn't work, you're opening the door to some development that's going to, you can justify demolishing any landmark building that way. And I don't think we really want to go down that way. I mean, economically, it's a tough time right now for some of these landmark buildings, but you're talking about changing how we view historic buildings as a community, and that, I think that's a dangerous area to go into. I mean, you consider them case-by-case basis as you bring them before the board and see if they have a good argument. But I don't think you want to open the door to saying, if it doesn't work for the developer, then we just get rid of a landmark building. It was landmark for a reason.
And I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So I don't know
agree
if we
with
want to put that language in this that says,
We're not talking about
Yeah.
encouraging the demolition of, we're talking about one building on a parcel of property here and it's one building.
but you
and-
said precedent with, the precedent's been set with that. And I don't think that's a good precedent, and I just really disagree with, I think we should encourage adaptive reuse, encourage it. Not mandate it, but encourage it. And that way, the developer has to look at it, and then if it doesn't work, okay, well, then make your argument. But I don't think we should give them out saying, you can get rid of it if you want to.
When we discussed the Wesley Farm subdivision, in part because of the failure of finding adaptive reuse for this Miller estate, we encouraged redevelopment if possible, but did not require it. And interestingly, in the case of Wesley Farms, a family has come in and they're totally restoring the home. Given that Arthur Miller does not consider this to be an issue.
He does now, he does.
Okay, well, I see the surrounding uses of the property to be, it's pretty tough to keep that one isolated mansion when you have what's built there now, let alone what might also be built in the future. So I would agree with language that one might say encourage, but leave it open and not make it a requirement that it
Right.
stay.
So if you use the word encourage, you're encouraging them to look at it. If it doesn't work, then make your argument, but don't encourage demolition.
I think
What was the
We're- we're-
language, Commissioner?
I don't have, unfortunately, I don't have proposed language that we can, all look at and dissect, and maybe that's something that, we can do offline and come back and look at instead of, having a discussion in the abstract. But,
Right.
I think with the appropriate language, I think we can balance the comments that Commissioner Athelson's come up with, which as I said, I completely respect. And I think if we, and maybe Commissioner Moorhead would agree, because, he and I think, are on the same page, but I think we could come up with some language that balances the appropriate concerns that you have, as well as, I think, the feeling that other commissioners are stating here in regards to that residence vis-a-vis the overall development.
I think what I'm hearing is we want to encourage consideration of adaptive reuse in any planning of the site, but not require, and again, the comprehensive plan can't require or mandate. So encourage consideration, and I do think thought is being given. I will say that when the council did approve the Conway Market development, which did not go forward, that house was demolished as part of that. So it's been approved for demolition once, but we can certainly clarify that language to say encourage consideration of adaptive reuse. And again, I think the current developer is carefully considering that option. Whether it's viable or not, I don't know. But we can make that change if that's agreeable to the commission.
So I've written down, encourage consideration of adaptive reuse of Miller Estate, but not require it.
Yes, and again, we'll wordsmith it, but
Right.
that's what I'm hearing, is encourage consideration of adaptive reuse.
Sounds fine.
I think that sounds acceptable.
Commissioner Ruggles?
I don't really have many comments on the new draft, but I did want to thank staff and all the volunteer committees that worked on the plan. I think that they spent many, many hours listening to feedback from other community members and tried to put together a vision for the future, which I feel will address many of our concerns moving forward.
Commissioner Moorhead?
I feel the same way. I don't have too much to add. I do like the updated chapter. I think it's important to support Conway Park, and the discussion about opportunity area number 3 is helpful in that regard, with some consideration to adjustment of the setbacks. If in the future car trips are not what they are now, possible improvement of the outlots in the parking lots, or in the Conway Park lots is worth of consideration. The cul-de-sac on Amberley, based on what I've heard and read, sounds like a wise thing to consider.
And that is included in this?
Yes.
Yes.
Then the bike and pedestrian access, the walkability is, in my opinion, a very good idea. The emergency access easement between the Lake Forest Academy area and Conway Park, I think that's a very good idea, and I think actually that should be, in my opinion, a real priority of the city, considering the increase in freight traffic in that corridor in the last 10 years. 20 years, and the transportation of ethanol and other liquid chemicals. And then, sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. And then transportation, I agree, with respect to the light rail, I don't know if there would be critical mass or it would pass a cost-benefit analysis, but I think being open to a variety of transportation, continuing that discussion with the Conway Park companies, and including broad-minded considerations like light rail are good ideas. So that's kind of all I have at the moment. But in general, I am supportive of the revisions and the update.
Commissioner Atkinson?
Okay, I'm gonna go through this just section by section here, because I think I've already talked about some of these, but, so for the first part of the introduction to this, I know you need to proofread it a little bit better and then do some wordsmithing, because it's a little rough still. So I think we pointed that out. And then we talked about the vision already, kind of expanding that based on the slide you showed in the PowerPoint to make it more specific and not so general, and more specific to Lake Forest. Let's see. Let's see what I have here. Okay, then on, let's see, oh, this is what I was doing. Okay, so, what we had just mentioned, oh, I can't read my writing here, sorry. Oh, yes, so on page 3 on 7, so taking what Jamie said about the light rail, not necessarily light rail, whatever the language is. So on page 3 of 7 where it says D, and explore, support, and encourage transportation options. So, and just maybe add something to that, and possibly in the future, I don't know if you want to say light rail connections to airport and other suburbs, but something that's non-automotive, non-vehicle, so we get
Mass transportation, I mean, just leave it
Something-
at that, some sort of
okay.
form of mass transportation.
something other than cars and buses, so.
So if we just say explore, support, and encourage mass transportation, just add the word
Or
mass.
see, it says how it says train stations, bus shelters, accommodations for ride-sharing, trails for bicycles and pedestrians, just add maybe a mass transit under that or something at the end of that section, just so we get that idea out there, so it's something to talk about in the future. Okay, so under, on page 4, number 2, so, we're going back and forth about the landmark estate. I think just adding something that's saying, like you said, Kathy, encourage adaptive reuse of landmark estate, and leave it at that. And it allows, the city to say, we encourage, keeping these landmark buildings and looking at adaptive reuse, but it doesn't restrict them from coming and saying, okay, we've done the due diligence, we've tried, and it hasn't worked. So I think just leaving it like that and not being so detailed, just saying encourage adaptive reuse of the landmark estate. I also was thinking about adding to that section a G that says maintain consistent wooded setback all along Route 60 to keep wooded character of Lake Forest. And what I say when I say that is, I'm not saying the 150 setback. I'm not saying 150, but I think what we have to really consider is, especially on that section 5, where we're thinking about doing all the amenities, or no, 3, I'm sorry, 3, I can't read it. up there.
5 talks about the setbacks, so.
Yeah, but on 3, on section 3
Oh,
here,
oh.
on the parcel
Right.
3. You don't want it to be clear cut like Vernon Hills. You don't want something, we've got this wooded character all along Route 60, and you want to maintain that character. But I don't want to specify it has to be 150. So, but I'm more concerned about keeping that wooded character all along Route 60. So I don't know if that's sufficient in here, that we've done that enough.
But it's not wooded on the north side. I mean, where
That's
the
true.
office parks
That's
are.
true.
So I think that we have to leave some flexibility in the plan. So when the developer comes forward with their landscape plan, it's reviewed in a comprehensive manner.
Yeah, I mean.
I'd agree
do a
with
parcel-
Commissioner Robles.
parcel.
And I think that's addressed in that's why I said 5. If you look at page 5 of 7, paragraph 5, sub E, it talks about, you know, the landscape plans and establishing the setbacks, and I think that's what Commissioner Ruggles is talking about as well, and I would agree with that.
Yeah, I don't know if I like that, that personally, reduced setbacks for commercial developments that incorporate quality architecture and landscaping. Maybe you get rid of that sentence and just leave, maintain established setbacks.
I wouldn't agree with,
I
doing
think it's
that.
well-written.
I think, I would agree.
Okay.
And we're primarily talking about 2 undeveloped sites.
Mm-hmm.
One that is directly south of the office park and is needed for some commercial, residential, and we're building in flexibility there. But we have to be realistic about the fact that some commercial and retail ventures are going to need visibility and may in fact need a setback less than 150 feet. But what we are encouraging, looking at that site as a whole. When the proposal was given to us in March of last year, it was for only a portion of the site. And I think the feeling from the commission was we wanted to see the site development plan as a whole.
Yeah, I just am afraid that we're gonna get something that looks like the Vernon Hills development, where it's mostly, you know, hardscape and no landscape. And, you know, like, of course, we're so landscape dominant. I guess I'm just trying to figure out a way where we can encourage more landscaping as opposed to more pavement.
Well, it's difficult when you have only 8.5 acres, and it is adjacent to 2 office buildings that have a fairly large parking field there. I mean, it's really part of that commercial entryway before we open up to the broad landscaping that continues east.
Okay, well, that was just my suggestion. That's something, we add something in there, but that was just my comment. So, because I think it's just important to maintain our, you know, what we have that's so unique is our landscape dominant, you know, feature, and especially on that south side, it is mostly, it's pretty heavily wooded, so.
Well,
I mean,
you're
don't
leaving
you
open
think-
options for.
Don't you think the language, though, you know, quality architecture and landscaping in a well-designed site plan is sufficient enough?
Well, that's why I'm wondering, is it sufficient enough? If we had something about,
I think it's sufficient enough. I mean, I don't think we can like micromanage.
no,
the-
and I
would
don't want
agree.
to. I want
developer.
to allow for flexibility, but also get that point through,
Well,
so.
I think that's kind of, I think the verbiage that, you know, whatever that section is, item 5, letter E, and the maintain the established setbacks, except in opportunity areas where commercial uses are identified as preferred uses. And then it goes on to say, reduce setbacks for commercial developments that incorporate quality architecture and landscaping into a well-designed site plan, et cetera. I mean, I really think that's a very strong statement and gives the developer, you know, appropriate language as what, you know, the boards will be looking for with a petition.
Okay,
I agree.
all right, here's a comment I was making. The other comment I had was, we want to be flexible with our housing, what we're allowing, and I had brought up the idea of high density. Now, I don't know if high density is the term to use, because we say including moderate and high-end multifamily housing. So when you, Kathy, what do you think, when you say moderate multifamily housing, what does that mean?
I would say that in the minds of most people, we don't have any high-density
Right.
high-density residential anywhere in Lake Forest.
Right.
And, you know, by throwing out high density, I think you leave it open to interpretation. Are you talking about 8 stories, 12 stories? I think moderate, we see the development that's occurring around the central business district, and that really is moderate density. So, again, I think the zoning code, if we were to change zoning on a property, or if a developer comes in for a special use permit, that's where we'd actually define exactly what the density is. But I think encouraging a variety of housing types, and if you want us to be more specific about add a variety of densities, we could certainly add that language. But I'm not sure. High is, I think that could be interpreted by some people differently from what perhaps you're thinking.
Yeah. Well, that's what I want to get away from, you know, because I'm thinking high density is more like apartment buildings, you know, with, and not necessarily 8 stories, but that's the dilemma. I don't want to discourage, you know, a rental apartment building, maybe, I don't know. It's just an idea of, you know, allowing flexibility for housing. Let's say someone buys a couple of those acres on parcel 4 and gets it rezoned, and they want to put up some apartment buildings to attract the new workers that are in
And the
here.
plan does speak to both ownership and rental as housing types. So I think it provides flexibility as far as housing types.
Okay, so maybe something with flexibility of housing types, rental and
I think it's
single family.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at, it's page 4 of 7, 3E. So it says moderate and high-end multifamily housing. So I guess it's allowed
In any
for-
of these plans, I'd like to have some flexibility. So, and not to make the language too limiting. Just by point of reference, the condominium building there at Amberley, how many stories is that?
It's 3, I think.
I thought it might be higher.
4 or 5?
Yeah.
No, because then they have the
4?
roof.
Is it 4?
4, okay.
So that's what I would consider high density, is something like that. But whether that's Lake Forest high density or Chicago high density, who knows?
Well, a lot of this would be looking at the plan as a whole.
Maybe defining those too, somewhere along the line.
Well, normally, we have the developer, the petitioner, establish the plan that they prefer, and then we would comment on that. And certainly, the developers would take into consideration the financial viability of the transaction, too.
Okay. All right, and let's see. On page 6 of 7, when we talk about transportation vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles, I want to make sure that we extend the sidewalk along Route 60 on both the north and south sides, all the way to Waukegan. We had talked about that before.
Well, you do have the railroad underpass, and I don't see any room there at that particular junction for a sidewalk.
Well, in the future, if something happens, I mean, it's just the whole idea of allowing pedestrian access from Waukegan Road has sidewalks, and you could connect those all the way. And
Well, and we were looking at a plan that the consultants proposed where it showed, and we may even have it here, potential points to cross over Route 60 or go under Route 60.
Well, I thought we talked about that last time, though.
Yeah,
that
we did.
They were going to include a sidewalk on the south side. So anyways, that's what I was just suggesting, that we talked about that last time, and then we'll
Does
include
it,
that.
you know,
Weren't we
6D,
talking-
locate paths in a safe distance from roadways to provide a comfortable and pleasant experience for users while allowing for a visibility of activity along the corridor, bringing it alive.
Yeah, I think primarily there we were talking, and the consultants mentioned perhaps even doing an overpass over the railroad towards the back of the fields, the south end of the field. So you're away from Route 60, and as you can see here, there are some trail connections then that they make. As opposed to a sidewalk out at Route 60, you do have trail connections that could potentially connect to the West Campus and ultimately Waukegan Road.
That
It
was my
might be nicer
suggestion.
than trying to go along.
Yeah, I'm just trying to connect all the pedestrian access, you know, from Waukegan all along 60, and I thought that's what we talked about last meeting. And so.
Well,
I guess
one
that's
thing I did ask Kathy when we had a conversation about this, we should have, when we really get to the point where the city is going to be able to put in these sidewalks and/or trails, or both, to get input from the police, the fire, and traffic consultants, because Route 60 is a fairly heavily trafficked road, and sometimes having it near Route 60, but perhaps not right at Route 60, is much more amenable to pedestrians and safer for children especially.
Yeah, I see a lot of people walking on Waukegan on those sidewalks, so.
On Waukegan.
And
Right.
then there's no access. Like, it just was an idea that we talked about last time.
There is a chapter in the comprehensive plan on transportation, and the council not too long ago adopted a bicycle master plan. So we can go back, and that actually did involve police and Lake Forest Open Lands and the schools. So there was a lot of discussion. We can go back. I do not think that plan anticipated anything directly along Route 60 between the railroad overpass and Waukegan because of wetlands, because of the grade change, because of the creek there. I think the thought was we have the bridge now north of Route 60, and in the ideal world, there was a concept for a bridge that connected Town Line Park to the high school. But we can, again, I think that those routes were studied pretty carefully, so we can go back and check that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and there's still input from these entities, and we don't quite know when those might get established. So the plan allows for sidewalks and pedestrian routes. We just don't perhaps have exactly where they are at this time in our comprehensive plan.
Okay, so maybe I misunderstood. I thought that's what this was for. Okay. All right, so I think that covers everything I was jotting down here. Oh, the other thing that I was looking at was the fast track possibility. Where did I see that?
The streamline?
Yeah, 2D. Oh, streamline processes for preferred uses and site plans. It's page 4 of 7. It's section 2, number D. Streamline processes for preferred uses and site plans and architectural designs that fully meet established development and design standards. I hesitate, like I had said, like putting that in the comp plan, just because I want to ensure that we have transparency and responsiveness to communities and just allow, I just want to make sure that the city process is honored and works. And I don't think we need to say anything about we're going to streamline the process, because I don't think we want to go down that route. I think we want to make sure that everyone knows that you have an opportunity to comment and that you have to go through the process. You know, we used to use consent agenda a lot, where if a petition meets all the criteria, you can just put it on the consent agenda. But I don't really think we need to put in streamlined processes for preferred uses and site plans.
And again, by putting that in, it just speaks to efficiency. It doesn't, until you amend the code, it doesn't change any particular process. But that language is included in the Waukegan Road Settler Square Business District plan as well. It is something we hear frequently, and whether it's in there or not, we continually work to try and streamline processes. That is not the same thing as cutting out the opportunity for public comment.
Okay.
Well, and it would be, if a developer comes to you and wants to do something, you could say, well, these are the uses that we'd like to see, as you see on our comprehensive plan, and these are the ones that will proceed more quickly, that you would probably have more assurance of being accepted by the community. So it's an encouragement to give the community what it wants.
And I think if it's in the Waukegan Road statement, then it should be in this one too.
System.
And it's still subject to notice and the opportunity to be heard, right? The public hearing?
Including the language in the comprehensive plan doesn't change anything that the code requires. You could later, or the council could later direct, but some change to the process. But this really is intended, as Chairman Kerr said, for us to have something in the comprehensive plan, and we say it now. You know, here's your path to quick approval, and you follow the city's design guidelines, you're gonna get streamlined approval compared to if you're not. So it's really not different than what we do right now. Many projects go through very quickly. Less than 2% of all permits that issued are seen by any board or commission. And I think that's a lot of misinformation that is out there.
So those were all my comments.
Thank you. Any other comments from members of the commission? Are we prepared tonight, then, to make a motion to recommend approval of the update to the chapter in the city's comprehensive plan relating to the Route 60 entrance corridor and surrounding area? And if there are any particular areas, such as we had to Settler Square, that we wanted them to pay particular attention to, we could add that in, and one would be to ensure that with the Miller Estate encourage consideration of adaptive reuse, for the council to consider that, and to be open to a variety of transportation options. I don't know if we need to make that part of the motion, Kathy, or if we have in the minutes these changes you could make to the draft that are appropriate and in keeping with the comments from the commissioners.
I have incorporated that language along with clarifying language about differing residential densities without necessarily specifying the density.
I'd make a motion to adapt this updated chapter of the comprehensive plan relating to the Route 60 entrance corridor, taking into consideration, as Kathy just said, and incorporating the comments from Commissioner Athison that she's gone through, and Chairman Kerr that she's gone through, and the other comments that have been made. Subject to those comments, I would make that motion to adopt this.
Is there a second?
Second?
Second. Any discussion before the vote? All those in favor say aye.
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 4 ayes. All those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so we have 4 ayes and 1 nay, and the motion passes. Other items tonight: opportunity for the public to address the Plan Commission on matters not on the agenda. Do we have any additional information from staff?
I have nothing further for you.
Seeing no further business, the meeting is adjourned.